Hi everybody and welcome back to another RCGP session, this week focused on CV and interview success. My name is Anthony, I'm an ST3 GP trainee and I'm your host today. Throughout this series, we're going to be speaking to GPs from a range of different backgrounds to share their experiences and top tips for a successful transition into independent general practice. Today we're joined by another brilliant GP, Dr. Sonali Kinra, who is a salary GP in North and West London and also a GP retention lead for the Nottingham Integrated Care System. And we can talk a bit about that working quite in two different localities when we kick off. So thank you so much, Sonali, for joining us today. So I just mentioned kind of you're doing one job in Nottingham, you're doing one job in London. You've obviously just kind of transitioned fairly recently between the two locations. How are you finding that?
Thank you, Anthony, for asking me to do this with you. So it's a pleasure to do this, and congratulations to all the AITs who have completed their training and completed their CCT and joined us in Team GP. And for those who are taking their exams, good luck, and I really hope that everything goes well for you. So you're right, yes, I moved from Nottingham really only in about January. So I CCT'd about 12 years ago, and I've been working as a GP partner primarily in Nottingham City, which I did for about 9 to 10 years, and I moved to then London in January. My husband's been in London for the last 3 years, and we've had a weekend relationship for about 6 to 7 years out of the 12 that we've been married. So I decided to call time on it and then move to London. I've been the GP retention lead for the Nottingham and Nottinghamshire Integrated Care System, appointed to that role in September, and decided that, with kind of my senior responsible officer, that they were happy for me to continue in that role because I had the majority of that work of that role is about networking with other people, being aware of your, having an ear to the ground with regards to the workforce, as well as having the links into various stakeholders. So I've continued in that role. How have I been able to balance the two? So in that way, COVID has worked well for me, I would say. So prior to COVID, I was traveling to Nottingham 1 day a week for meetings and everything, but ever since March, I've not been back to Nottingham, though meeting them virtually. So I still continue to do that 1 day a week, which is always spills into more than 1 day a week because you end up doing stuff on weekends. And I do a salary GP role in North and West London, which I do for 4 days a week. So people have been warm and welcoming, certainly in this area, but yes, still miss some of the teamwork, that I had back in Nottingham, and I do stay in touch with them.
Yeah, of course. And I think in many ways, you've just been through, a fairly big transition in your working role, and lots of all trainees who are kind of currently finishing would be going through a similar transition, thinking about what job might be right for them, going through kind of their CV building and interview process. So I guess if we start off by talking around CVs, what top tips would you have for anyone who's kind of thinking about how to build a successful CV? What should be included? What are the keys to success with that?
Yeah, and I think, and also having gone through that process, because I think when I moved in January, I had been applying for jobs myself. So after a long hiatus of about 12 years to start looking again for a job in itself, and at any time it can feel a bit, you can be a bit anxious about it. You're not sure because you're stepping into a world that you may not totally be afraid with. So top tips for CV. So one, I think keep up to date with yours. Keep it updated. Certainly, if you've done any courses or if you've attended any sessions, make sure that you're keeping your CV updated. Ensure that if you've had any gaps in your employment or your training, you mention it very clearly in the CV. So when I was a partner and we were going through CVs at that time and people were applying for roles, if there were certain gaps, then you're unsure of it. So make sure that you've covered those areas of the gaps that are there. Highlight all the activities. So I think we sometimes undersell ourselves, certainly in the CV as well. So if you've done an audit, you've done a quality improvement project in the practice, please highlight that in the CV. People do read the CVs, and it's a good, again, talking point for you, which they'll pick up during the interview. And try to sell yourself in that, to say, what was your role? It's important for you to be very clear as to what your role was in that quality improvement project. It could be that the fact that you thought of a concept, how did you go about operationalizing the concept? So it's again important to not undersell, certainly, yourself. Make sure that if you've got your referees on the CV, that one, you've spoken to them already about it, and two, also that you've got all their details correct. You've got their mobile numbers that are correct and their email addresses. That's usually the way that we tend to make contact with them. In terms of mentioning your previous jobs, certainly I would say there used to be one page of mine that was filled up with all the various jobs that I had done, because I had done hospital training as well. Just make sure there are no breaks in it, but I don't think you need to possibly mention each and every hospital that you've been to. So if your GPBTS training has taken you to a place or to a practice, mention that as a group maybe, because again, people don't want to read 4 or 5 pages of the CV. They want to know who you are, what is there about you that is going to make you fit into their practice. Have a bit of a personal statement, I would say, again, something that you do outside, your working life. Put in a little bit about, again, yourself, so that they can. So if I give you an example, I was training for a half marathon, I think, at that time, and I had put that in, and again, it becomes a topic for something for you to discuss, and finding that commonality, that's something that that you can pick up on, not just during discussion, but also when you go into the practice, they may wish to maybe go running with you.
Definitely. And I think that's something I think that's really helpful, because sometimes it's definitely a struggle to know how much detail you should be putting on there, because like you say, people don't want to be going through reams and reams of paper. So I guess kind of picking out, like you say, some key highlights, things that if there was something you want to highlight that you actually did or contributed towards a specific project, or something you were proud of that you did when you were in a specific role, I guess those are the things that people are really looking for to make you stand out as unique when people are looking through a handful of different CVs for the same role.
Absolutely. I think more than kind of courses, so we know that you would have done your mandatory training of safeguarding and BLS, isn't it? So it's good to know all of those things, but who you truly are, what is it that you can bring into the practice, I think holds more weight than the courses which we all know that you would have done.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that sometimes I struggle to know how much to put in, or what are the key things I should be saying, is if they ask for a covering letter. In terms of that, when you were looking at applications for jobs as a partner, what are the kind of key things you'd look for in there that make somebody stand out?
Yeah, so interestingly, I don't think this time around I did a covering letter. I think I must have done one when I took on the partnership role, probably 8 or 9 years ago. I think again, I think as GPs, we probably get to the point very quickly at times. So covering that, I think just make sure that it's very clear on that as to if how you can be contacted if you're going away on leave or something, just so that if there is at all that they're planning to schedule some interviews at that time, and just in case you're not away. So I would probably put more of those things in terms of how best to get in touch with you. And then probably what would grab my attention would be your personal statement, which I would hope would be very much on the first page, which immediately tells me who you are and what you're hoping to bring with you.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then we've kind of written our CV. Hopefully we've got offered an interview somewhere. Obviously a really nerve-wracking experience, particularly for lots of us who might not have done that for a long time. What are your kind of key tips there for somebody to be successful in an interview? What are the things they should think about beforehand? And when they're in that setting, how can they sell themselves as effectively as possible?
So one of the other things I will say, Anthony, is that the time between the CV and the interview, I would always make contact with the practice. So certainly, there's always something to find out a bit more about the practice, because in interview, as much as we would want it to be a dialogue, it becomes very much a question that is being asked by those people on the panel and you answering. So really those informal meetings are very useful, and I think they're valued by not just the person who is coming to so not just the newly qualified GP, but also those people who are there in the practice. I would certainly invest some time in making that contact as well as doing as an informal practice, because that's when you really start to, just going into the waiting room, seeing how, well, when we had the waiting room, so to say, you may not have so many people now in the waiting, but how does the receptionist meet you? How does the receptionist kind of greet you? Do they get you to sign the attendance book? Again, what are the kind of, shows whether they've got some sort of attendance book there, and they've got the governance system that is in there. Are there clear signs for the patients to be signposted or to be navigated around the practice? Does it look quite organized, or does it look quite chaotic? So you start to really pick up those soft signs, some things that we GP pride ourselves in, that, even when we see like our patient, we used to get them to walk from the waiting room. We say that we pick up so many of those soft signs. So similarly, I would say go to, have that informal visit, speak to the partners, speak to the salary GP, speak to the locums if they're there, speak to the receptionists. The receptionists are truly the heart of the practice, I would say. They know what's really happening. Spend some time with the practice manager, the nurses, the HCAs. So I would certainly invest some time in that. And then after the informal, certainly visit, hopefully you will get a call for the interview. Going to the interview, so make sure you're on time, make sure you're smartly dressed, make sure if they've asked you to bring any documents with you, make sure you're carrying those with you so that there is no confusion around that. Give yourself ample time. Ask about parking. Is there going to be parking at the place? If that is what they're doing, if they're doing it as a face-to-face. However, if you think you can't do it face-to-face, absolutely, you're in the right place to ask for a virtual interview these days. So, make sure you ask them for that as well. But again, find out if they want you to do a presentation. Some practices do ask for that. Okay, then if they do, then if you do get asked for a presentation, check in with your peers. Have they done that? Check in with people like us. Please make contact with us. We will be more than happy to support you through this. We can, direct you to some resources such as, if you've had the GP contract, or if you've had the, when we had the GP forward view. So we'll be able to direct you to all those resources. When you're there in the interview, so again, remember that it's a panel likely that is going to be there. So there'll be a few people who may be asking you questions, and the way we usually do is we tend to divide the questions between us, who is going to ask the question. Remember, when you're answering the question, don't look at just the person who asked you the question. Make sure you go through, kind of make eye contact with each of the panel members, because likely the person who's asking the question. So I remember this tip given to me by Dr. Raj Patel. The person who's asked you the question is probably going to be too busy writing down your response. It's going to be the other people that you can make the eye contact with. And I found that extremely useful, certainly, to say. So make sure you're addressing everybody within the practice. If you can remember their names, even better, address them by their names. Always try to, when they ask you any question, take a pause. I speak very fast, I know, and I'm also very, I can have my animated and have my arms around. Take a pause and try to link it with a patient you may have seen, or a case that you've been, witnessed, or you've been a part of. And always bringing it back to the patient, I have felt, brings out not just the best in you, it also brings out what you're going to add to the practice. So just if you keep on always bringing down the question back into how did it help the patient, I think you are always in a safe space. Mm. After the patient level, I would say, if you've got any question in which you can actually focus on the workforce. So again, this is probably me coming from a GP retention lead hat on. Try to see what you can do for the workforce. So in there was a gentleman who was applying for a partnership, and he wanted some support. So I did a couple of Zoom calls with him, and he was preparing for a partnership interview. That's what he was supposed to be doing, kind of what change you can bring into the practice. And that's the way we spoke to. We once spoke about the focus on patient, and the second was the well-being of your workforce. We know that a happy workforce leads to better outcome for patients. So if that's the way you are answering any question, where you clearly remember you're here for the patient and you're here for the people that you work with, I think you won't go wrong.
Yeah, I think that's it's really helpful. Obviously, I'm just about to start going through this process. And I think that's I'm going to definitely hold on to all of that advice. I think that's really important, that idea of holding on to the patient and how you actually, and the things you've done, how they've benefited them, actually really does help to focus everyone's mind on who you are and what you add to the what you could bring to the practice. So that's really fantastic advice.
If I could just add another thing to that, Anthony, that if at any time you get into a situation where sometimes we get they're not negative questions, but they are supposed to just challenge you a little bit, talk about a challenging circumstance, or talk about heart sync patient. If you come across certain questions like this, see if you are able to turn it around. So maybe you had a heart sync patient, maybe you had a challenging circumstance, but what was it, the positive thing that you were able to get out of it? What was it and how did you then reflect on it to improve things for the future, for yourself, for the patient, as well as for the practice? If you are ever posed a question which you haven't come across during your training time, again, don't, I think, worry or fear. Think then outside the practice, maybe with your friend circle, maybe in your family. You may have come across those circumstances. How would you deal with it in that situation, or how have you dealt with it in that situation? And then just try to transpose that into the practice to be able to give the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. It just made me think that, I should definitely have a look back through my Eportfolio, see if there's any really interesting cases there that I could take to interviews. But also, in my training scheme, and I know lots of others have Ballant groups or similar setups every few weeks. So thinking, again, like you say, if friends or colleagues have brought cases to those discussions, which have made you think, if I encountered something similar, then I'd feel more prepared on what to do. I think that's all really good advice. I guess, I think what people are looking for is someone who is a reflective, kind of like self-aware clinician who's bringing a skill set to the practice. And I think being able to reference your own experiences or the experiences of colleagues, that's a really helpful way to be able to paint a picture of how you can succeed in that role.
Absolutely. So the fact that you've been through the training, you've received your CCT, I would know, if I'm sitting on the other end, that, in terms of the subject matter, you're a subject matter expertise, general practice. It's you as the person. It's again about how you will fit into, it's all about the culture of the place, isn't it? So it's as much about you fitting into the practice, but also is the practice right for you? So that's quite important as well, because again, you may be used to a certain, style of working or style of the place. So I think there has to be, it is really a marriage. It has to be the fact that it fits right from both ends, not just from the practice end, but from your end as well.
Yeah. And you've mentioned kind of doing things like going for an informal visit to the practice. Are there any other tips you'd have for people who are thinking about applying for a job or accepting an offer, how they can best get an idea of whether that practice is right for them? I guess they can get an idea from the interview as well when they meet people. Any other kind of tips that you'd give for people who are thinking about taking on an opportunity?
So one of the few things that I did, I know we all hold our views about CQC, but I do look at the CQC rating and also to kind of look into the detail as to what was written about leadership and other governance processes around the practices. So, what do they do with their prescriptions? How do they manage their shared care drug monitoring? Simple things like that you may be. So I would certainly advise you to look at CQC, look at the QOF ratings. I think that's, again, important for you to consider. Also explore, maybe make contact with the LMC. The LMC, again, has a good insight into the local practices. So it's always useful to see if there's a practice liaison manager within the LMC, and they might be able to give you some insight into it. See if there are any other local, your peer groups that are there. People may have locumed in that particular practice. They may be able to give you some insight. Don't feel shy to ask also other GPs already within the area. So, if you are doing any meetings, so in the days gone by, we would have like educational meetings and you would come across certain GPs. But if you're now doing certain virtual meetings or CPD groups, ask within that. Don't feel shy about it. Ask them how, any insight into the practice. I would say certainly now with the scheme of the new to practice scheme, which is by NHS England, certainly has the 3 pillars, isn't it? Which is induction, mentoring, and support. So make sure you've linked in with your training hub or whichever organization that is being the provider for the new to practice program. Because not only will you get information about the practice, you'll also find out if there is a fellowship program. So in Midlands, we are having the introduction of the Trailblazer Fellowship, which has been an absolute success in York and Humberside, and we're delighted that it's come to Midlands. So, and similarly in London, there have been the Spin Fellowships. So how you can get the balance right, of where you can still get the support, provide the clinical care, but make sure you continue on your professional development as well. So those would be the few things certainly I would advise you to look at.
Fantastic, thank you. Again, all really useful. And yeah, here in London we've got Spin. I've seen definitely really great things from their Trailblazer fellowships that you mentioned. Those look really exciting. But yeah, all around the country these fellowships are starting to crop up more and more. And so do keep an eye out for those as well, because they're not just many of them are not just open to people who are immediately post CCT. It's kind of recently qualified people as well. So even if you qualified 1-2 years ago, there are opportunities for you to get involved in these as well. Kind of one final question that I wanted to ask was just around kind of finding your feet. So obviously you've gone through quite a big transition earlier this year, and lots of trainees who are just taking on their first roles as independently practicing GPs will be going through a similar transition. When you're starting out in a new role, what are the kind of any tips that you've got for finding your feet, bedding yourself in, and kind of hitting the ground running?
Take your time. It is a transition. It is as much a transition for you as for the practice. Make sure that, so again, if there is not already, whether it's a coffee meeting or a virtual coffee meeting that is there in the practice, make that suggestion. Not only will that help to embed you, it will actually be a reprieve for the people who've already been there, because everybody is feeling tired currently. So I think it will be really welcomed. So if you've gone into a new place and they don't do it, make the suggestion. I did, certainly when I joined this new practice, I think 2 or 3 weeks in, I did take breakfast for all of them, which was very much welcomed. And so again, just a gesture, as a token that you're a new person who's come in and you appreciate all the hard work that is being done. Appreciate the work that is being done by the receptionist. I do think that the receptionist, the nurse, the HCAs, they really do have the toughest job. So, spend some time with them, go and find out how their day is going. Make sure that, you make it very, that you're just new in the practice. There may be certain things that you don't know them. So make your friends there, because these are the people who will really come in to help you when you need it. So do that as well. Don't let go of your peer support groups. So people you've known through the training, there may be some people who stay in the area while others may move. So make sure you've set up some WhatsApp group. I'm an absolute fan of WhatsApp groups. You'll see me in all possible WhatsApp groups around. So, stay in touch. I think in the days gone by, they were probably called as action learning sets in a more formal sense. I think these are my action learning sets. So stay in touch with your peer support groups. Link up with those people who are running the new to practice programs as well. And certainly within the primary care networks, of some of you may be aware who the clinical director is, but just find out, maybe make the contact there with the clinical director as well. Especially if you are interested in something like that, I would say make that early introduction, send them an email and just say, I've started in this practice. Is there anything I can do to help? Or I'm keen to learn more about the primary care network, just so that you can get a bit more of a wide overview as to what is happening in your area.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing so much really, really valuable advice. I feel like I've learned a lot from just this brief conversations, and it's going to really help me over the coming weeks and months as I go through this journey myself. So thank you for sharing. Did you have any final words or top tips that you wanted to leave anyone listening with?
Yeah, I would just say, please approach us. There are many of us here who are more than happy to help. So if you want to do an interview practice with us, as I said, COVID, the silver lining of COVID has just been that we are doing so much more stuff virtually. So we can always do, a Zoom meeting or an MS Teams and just go through interview questions with you. So I'm pretty sure that there'll be lots of people around like me. So just put a call out on social media and you'll get more help than you actually asked for. So that would be my only last tip, probably.
Fantastic. I think now you're going to be inundated with people getting in touch. As you say, I think lots of people are there to help. So I think that's really great final words to end the session with. So thank you again, Sonali, so much for sharing your experiences and top tips with us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you again for another session soon. Bye-bye.